Aha! Stay the fuck away, stay the fuck away. Stay the fuck away, stay the fuck away. Well, hello there. I am Sean Patrick. It's as I'm sure you noticed, it's been a while since I've done a show, and it's pretty difficult for me. Now, as my material is largely topical, I need to do my bits as the events unfold. Otherwise, they tend to lose their kick, and I end up not using it. Like how Japan hosted the Paralympics to commemorate 25 years of not forcibly sterilizing the athletes. Actually, that one still kicks. But, so you know, today's going to be a little bit of a mashup. Let's get started with that unnecessary election we had. The opposition parties couldn't point out enough how this election was costing $600 million taxpayer dollars. We could have built a hospital for that, they said. Really? What the fuck? So to really understand what's going on here, I spent a long fucking time researching how elections are paid for. Here's a short summary. After an election, the parties do an audit, just like us doing our taxes. As long as they got 2% of the national vote, or 5% of the vote in the districts they ran candidates, they can claim back 50% of everything they spent. There are ways to get more back, and just like your taxes, there's a lot of stuff that they can claim against it. So as far as I can tell, it really works out closer to about 80% that can be claimed. Now, I'm not a tax lawyer or anything. It's probably more than that. Now, and this is taxpayer money. Now, that's the rules for all the parties. And as I previously stated, no minority government in history has lasted more than 2 years. And if JT didn't take the chance to get the majority government that the polls suggested he could, he wouldn't have been the leader for much longer. Sure, he could have tried to stick it out for the rest of his mandate, but not much would have gotten done, and a non-confidence vote could still trigger an election at any time. Now, it did make sense then, but in hindsight, it was a lot of taxpayer money to not change anything legislatively and still no hospital. Even so, something still didn't sit right with me about this claim. Then I realized that it isn't just Justin spending the tax dollars. You're standing there spending them whilst telling me how wrong it is. Spending money on mega tour buses, flying all over the place, and virtual studios that went virtually unused. Holy hypocrisy, Batman. And speaking of hypocrites, COP26. This is where the world's leaders showed just how serious they really are about climate change by having a private jet rally in Scotland. But wait, there's more. How did all of those protesters get there? Did they canoe from Canada? Bicycle from Brazil? And glide from Australia? And what about all of those plastic banners and the cardboard they've rendered unrecyclable by covering it in toxic paint made by children? But we've proven that worldwide simultaneous protests have an impact. And of all the times not to promote that, well, this nearly knocked me off my e-scooter. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to minimize the severity of climate change. Just the opposite, in fact. Instead of crisscrossing the world yelling that somebody has to do something about this, do something about this. Until you sprout wings and learn to fly, take care of your own yard. It's sad that the politicians lost their private jet pool with that whole Epstein thing, but get your head out of teenagers' asses. This was COP26. If we don't do something fast, we'll have more COPs. And nobody wants that. Right now, our federal politicians are having a big debate over hybrid parliament, which really outrages me. The Conservatives claim it leads to a lack of accountability. Well, if you've never watched a sitting of Parliament, it's a bunch of closed-minded adversarial rich people shouting over each other. When someone supposedly has the floor, you can hardly hear them. Screaming "you're wrong" back and forth is not accountability, it's a toddler fight. So their only real argument against saving millions of dollars, improving public safety, more inclusivity for rural MPs, more time to actually work in their own constituencies, and saving the environment is that it will force them to use better manners. Well, please, fuck you. Now, let's go back about a month when two big news stories dropped on top of each other that rightly caused outrage, but somehow caused shock as well. Did you know that rich people use tax havens? Gee, Wally, say it ain't so. Unfortunately, the figure skating community is unlikely to recover from the outing of Elvis Stoico, but of course they do. The only thing rich people hate more than the poor are taxes. How obvious could it be? A shelter from taxes, like the church is from reason. Is it wrong? Morally, yes, but it's even more legal than Rittenhouse. All the money filters through the banks and governments of the world, and since they're the ones that make the laws and regulations, it isn't likely to change. They're the ones who created them in the first place. So until they come up with a new way to live off tax dollars without paying any, sure, they've been talking about a 15% global corporate tax rate, but that would require not only every country and financial institution to agree to it, it would also require policing. And who does that? It also doesn't cover individuals. Tax law certainly isn't necessary reform that any of my fans will be alive to see. Now, are you ready for the other bombshell? Facebook puts profits before people. Well, I guess it would only be responsible of me to point out now that Santa doesn't exist, fire is hot, and I really was just petting that llama. Again, I'm not trying to minimize the damage it's done. Since I left Facebook years ago, the only thing to draw me back was to get pictures of dead friends. The only positive thing I've heard about social media is that it makes it easier to stay in touch with friends and family around the world, which is great. But that's not all it was used for. Pardon me. It became yet another forum for bullying, uttering threats, and spreading misinformation. Why is that? Profits before people. I have nightmares about what it would be like to be stuck to my phone like most people are. Sure, I'm online all the time, but I'm watching news or comedy or researching until I get a chance to actually talk to someone or do this shit. And while it is truly horrible what social media has become, our society is built on the three words profits before people. And then we try to inject this serious capitalism with socialist ideals like universal health care, which ends up poorly funded, and companies that are too big to fail. And that results in more than 4,000 unnecessary Canadian deaths from lack of care in the last year, and payouts to banks and manufacturers who close anyway. Fact is, we are at best doing a half-assed job of everything right now, which is why there's Omicron! I just can't say it any other way. And that brings us to the vaccinating of children. While the government wants us to get our kids vaccinated, their messaging needs to be far more clear. Many people are hesitant to get their children vaccinated because children don't tend to get seriously ill from the plague. And the official response should be one, every time the coronavirus is transmitted from one person to another, it gets a chance to mutate. Two, even mild infections can lead to long-term health problems. And three, do you really want to spin the wheel with Grandma's life again, assuming that she lived through last year's festivities? While all of these things have been said, they've mostly been said by international news and regulatory bodies, not North American. And they certainly haven't been put in that succinct a package. So while you're going around trying to comfort yourself by saying things like, the common cold is a coronavirus, think about this. A trout is a fish. And so is a piranha. A school teacher is a civil servant. And so is a police officer. Aspirin is a painkiller. And so is fentanyl. So, what did we learn tonight, kids? Just like all forms of discrimination, no amount of legislation is going to fix these issues. We need to act. All of these things are happening because of the personal choices we make on a day-to-day basis. Whether we help someone whose grocery bag's ripped, or we film it and post it on social media. Whether we congratulate the voluptuous dancer for their skill, or we body shame them. Whether we take steps to lower our personal carbon footprints, or cry about everybody has to do it or it won't work. Somebody around here needs to lead by example. Otherwise, there is no leaders. All of these personal choices add up to the greed, selfishness, and hypocrisy which gets reflected in our governments. So what are you going to do? Are you going to be an asshole? Or are you going to get vaxxed, wear a mask, stay the fuck away from each other, and wash everything? A lot. Yeah, no.